All right, let's now get the first of our experts in on what Nirmala Sitharaman should do in the budget. And it gives me great pleasure, and it's an honor to welcome a very special guest to tell us what should be in the budget and also perhaps his sense on where the Indian economy is heading to. Dr. Arvind Panagre, of course, was the first vice chairman of Niti Aayog, was a Sherpa also to G20, something that's increasingly going to be important this year. And he is, of course, the Jagdish Bhagwati Professor of Indian Political Economy at Columbia University. Dr. Panagre, always a pleasure to talk to you. You have been writing about some of the suggestions as to what you think the finance minister should do in the budget. So what would be your recommendation? If you were the finance minister, what would you put into the budget this year?
All right. So, the background to this is, of course, that India has emerged with flying colors out of the COVID crisis. This particular year, we are, even the advanced estimate of the government of India is 7% growth, which is better than virtually any other major economy in the world. I think most of the vitals of the economy are sound. So it's against that background that we have to maintain that kind of momentum of growth in the coming decade. So my suggestions, 2 or 3 of those. One, I think, and we can talk about that in detail if you wish, fiscal consolidation. The debt to GDP ratio is currently about 84%, which is on the high side. We, at least in the medium run, need to get to about 70% and perhaps a little further down later. Two, capital expenditures have been raised by the government, which is a difficult task to do given all the other demands on the fiscal. And that is should be maintained. The government has been very successful in building infrastructure. Unlike most past governments, they have been finishing projects on time, and some of the very big projects which had been languishing have been completed and all. So that's an area which is both important, and given the fact that the government is effective in implementation, should get priority. Defense, I think, needs to get a bit more priority as well. That is an area which, again, doesn't get enough expenditures, as long to the extent that fiscal constraints permit it, that has to be done. Then I have some suggestions on the tech side. As a trade economist, I'd like some trade liberalization to restart. This government has gone in the opposite direction in recent years. I think that is detrimental to the economy. It also, goes contrary to our general kind of wish to be integrated better and better in the global economy. And finally, there are some direct tax suggestions as well. That's personal taxation in particular.
Right, I'd actually like to go through all of those aspects. That's a pretty clear laying out of all the priorities that should be there in the budget a week from now. Let's look at each of them in some detail. Let's start off with what you said about the imperative for growth. And I think it's important to lay stress on that and the background to that. The rest of the world is slowing down. China is also slowing down. India, if it can't grow at 7% per annum for another decade, then suddenly you're talking about a lot of prosperity, a much larger economy, the 3rd largest economy in the world. And from what I hear from you, that should be the single-minded goal for the entire nation for the next 10 years.
Absolutely. Music to my ears, what you have said. I think, and this is very doable, because in nominal dollars, in the first 6 years of the Modi government, we did grow about 7.4%. And at that rate, within 6 years. So that was the past 6 years, I would say. And in the next 6, if we grow at the same rate, we become the 3rd largest. We get to $5.2 trillion from the current base of about $3.4 trillion. And as you said, absolutely, I think, it'll be prosperity all around. The abject poverty will be history. And indeed, we'll be in the prosperity zone, with $5.2 trillion. The per capita incomes would be in the range of $4,000 or $5,000 per capita. So that's fantastic.
Okay, so that's clearly the goal. Grow at a fast rate for a long period of time. Now, the second thing which you mentioned was fiscal consolidation. Now, obviously, that part of fiscal consolidation, the runway that we were on, got derailed a bit because of COVID. And that's only to be expected. India didn't go quite as crazy as some other countries did, but we did get off the path of fiscal consolidation. Do you think it's realistic to expect us to return to that path right now? Or there is an election coming up in a year or so. Do you think there's going to be a certain amount of populism?
Populism will be there, but I think that can be accommodated on account of a few things. One, the government did actually put an end to the free food 5 kilograms per person to about 800 million people that we've been giving. So that constitutes a big saving. Then we got the commodity prices in the world markets have come down. We had been spending enormously on fertilizer subsidy that will, I think, go down. Likewise, oil prices have been coming down. So we'll make some savings. So I think there is some room. Question is, how do you use that room? Do you use that to further expand the populist schemes, or you use that to consolidate? And I think, agreed, this is the last full budget before the election, before the parliamentary election. So some populism will have to be there, but I think there is still, that still leaves us some room. Also, there is some usual buoyancy in the revenues. So all that gives you some room to, about 0.5 percentage point reduction in the fiscal deficit.
I think you make a valid point that actually buoyancy in tax revenues is one of the untold or the unheralded stories. It's actually been a lot. And that also shows that if you have reform, which has happened in taxation, if you make it light touch, if you have a high trust environment, if you use data, if you make compliance easier, you can actually be quite surprised at just how much taxation can start to shoot up, collections can shoot up. That's what we are seeing, that's the benefit we are seeing in taxation. Perhaps that's reform we need to see in other sectors as well.
Yes, yes, and that is where, particularly the personal income taxation, it's written, with a vast number of exemptions. And that, of course, then leads the government to adopt very high tax rates. So on the margin, we are taxing, the higher incomes at the rates of 43, 44%, which then kills the incentive for people to work, and therefore, there is enormous room actually to lower the tax rates and the exemptions and still come out ahead in terms of the revenue generated. As you said just now, we had that kind of experience with GST. We also actually, we did some of this end to the exemption Raj and bringing down the tax rate in the corporate profit tax area. And there also, many people had sort of raised red flags saying that, the tax revenue will decline and all. None of that happened actually. Corporate profit tax has been returning larger and larger revenues year after year.
And that, of course, is the principle of the Laffer curve, right? That you bring down tax rates and tax collections actually go up. Now, are we going to see some of this, you feel, in personal taxation and income tax? The government did try this, right? They had two schemes. They said one scheme where you do away with exemptions, but not too many people actually took that up. To get that to happen, to move to that regime, do you think we now need to have a new system and perhaps a lowering of the rates that are out there so that people will take the scheme up? A simple scheme which everybody understands, lower taxation, starts to drive higher collections.
Correct. No, exactly. So the government did try in the budget 2020-21, they had introduced this alternative set of tax rates which were a little bit lower, but no exemptions were allowed. But there have been very few takers of that particular option. People have continued, most taxpayers have continued on the old system where they make use of the exemptions. And that's a very clear indication that therefore, the tax rates are still very high on this alternative set of tax schedule. So I think there is every reason to now start cutting those tax rates and make it more attractive for more and more people to actually move to that particular schedule. Eventually, of course, the goal ought to be to completely do away with the original schedule where lots of these exemptions are permitted.
Now, that's the revenue side. Coming to expenditure, you seem to be indicating that the government has been spending a fair amount on infrastructure, and that, of course, has had massive positive effects elsewhere. It kickstarts the economy, feeds back into it, makes exports easier if you're building good roads and good ports and importing logistics and you have good airports. So is that something that you would like to see continuing? In other words, would it be your advice to the government to worry about the fiscal deficit but do not allow that concern to slow down infrastructure spending?
Yes, actually, I go to the extent that if it really comes down that on the margin, it has to make a trade-off between building infrastructure and cutting the deficit to fiscally consolidate, I would sort of then lean in favor of continuing with the infrastructure buildup. Because, over the years, I have seen almost, last 20, 25 years, if the infrastructure is very difficult thing to do, this government is able to actually do it very successfully. And therefore, given its track record, the faster we build up what needs to be built up, because remember that we've been independent for 75 years, but country's infrastructure is still being built. We are not at a stage where all we need to do is, maintain the infrastructure that is fully built up. It is still not fully built up. And that is the reason I feel that, this government ought to really try to complete that task. And so, if the trade-off has to be made, then I lean in favor of continuing with infrastructure.
Okay, so that's a really interesting point to make. If it's a core strength of this government to be able to build infrastructure effectively, do it, even if it means relaxing the fiscal deficit. So would you have a number in mind? What sort of a fiscal number would you be okay with? Saying, that's fine, I think we can live with it this year and maybe, reduce it again next year.
Yeah. So, last year in the budget, we provided for 6.4% fiscal deficit. We should aim to bring it down to, maybe 5.7, 5.8%. That is a good signal. I think, right now what we are looking for a signal, we are not in a kind of situation that there is a crisis or something, or there is an imminent danger of a crisis. That's simply not the situation. So it's a matter of signaling. And so, even if we bring it down by 0.5, 0.6 percentage points, that's a good signal.
Okay, I think one of the last points that you were making was around international trade. And clearly, India wants to now become one of the alternatives to China. We want to become an export engine. We want to say Apple move 25% of your iPhone production here to India. So changes will need to be made to make sure that international trade is up and kicking. Now, there are two ways of doing this, of course. One is FTAs, and the other would be to bring down duties. Which one do you think the government should do?
See, I don't see those as one of as alternatives. I think they're complementary. We need to fire on all engines, and really FTAs have the advantage that the other countries also liberalize in for our exports to them. So we get better market access. So there is a reciprocity involved here. At the same time, of course, those are more difficult, and the larger the country with which you are negotiating, the more difficult it gets. So as you can see, that UK FTA has not still been done, though original plan was to have done it in 2022. And the EU one is still in rather early stages. And it will take a while, even if we succeed. I think UK one will succeed, but EU is still iffy. And in the meantime, we can't really afford to wait. So, there are two things that we need to be sort of cognizant of. One is that, when you restrict your imports, effectively you're restricting your exports. I mean, it's, there is a theorem in international trade, which is really my area of specialization. It says that, look, if you're going to impose 10% import duty across the board, that is identical to imposing a 10% export tax. I mean, in effect, what happens is that when you reduce your imports, what you have to pay back to buy those reduced imports in terms of exports is less now. So you end up actually exporting less as well. I mean, the only reason to export is that you want to import. And that is the basic idea that, if you're expanding your imports, you will have to expand your exports. You have to pay for those imports. So that's one thing. The second thing I think where we tend to go a bit wrong is the exchange rate. I think, there is this sense that somehow we want the rupee to be strong. But, if the rupee is overly strong, that makes our products more expensive to the foreigners. And that makes us uncompetitive. So I think, on rupee also, we need to be careful and in a measured way, let it depreciate.
And I just wanted to get your sense of it. Do you think this China plus one strategy can work well for India? Do you think it's actually going to happen, more and more companies moving their manufacturing bases away from China to India?
Well, I have long argued that India ought to start on the coast, something called the coastal export zones or coastal special zones or coastal employment zones, something, where basically the laws with respect to land markets, labor markets, etc., are much more flexible, where imports can come in with relative ease, exports can be sent out with relative ease, minimal kind of bureaucratic red tape and so forth. I think that can actually, this is what most successful countries have done. It'll be good if we could have that kind of flexibility in labor, land markets, and movement of goods in and out of the country everywhere. But usually it's more difficult. And in the Indian system, it is even more difficult. So if we can, do that in a few geographical zones, larger, not small little kind of these export zones that we have in the past, had in the past, take out 100, 200 square kilometer area, and there implement good policy with respect to land, labor, and capital, and international trade. I think that could go along.
Dr. Arvind Panagrahi, it's always such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. And let's see if Nirmala Sitharaman is going to take any of that into account when she presents the budget next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Right. Thank you. Thanks very much.